let's take a look at this problem. AJL and Associates audits company's financial records for fraud. When you read through this problem, it says that if there's no fraud, about 30% of the numbers in financial records will begin with the digit 1. So you might think it's like a 10% for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's actually 30% of the numbers begin with the digit 1. And it's suspicious if you're too far off from that. And so the question says you did a sample of 300 expenses and only 68 began with a digit 1. Now, if you do the math for this one, it seems like that's going to be a lot lower. It's 0.22, so about 22%. So the question is, should you invest more money in doing a thorough investigation of this company? Because it's so far-fetched that they would have 22%, and I'll put it right over here, that they have 22% on the sample, about 22.6 or 0.226 or 0.2267, something like that. Or is that close enough where it doesn't ring a bell or it doesn't sound an alarm and you got to keep going with it? So a lot of times you don't want to audit someone that's a perfectly fine company. You want to spend your time auditing, especially if like you're the federal government. You want to spend your time auditing people who are probably causing fraud versus those that are sitting there doing everything that they can correctly. Let's just review a couple things. So type 1 error was rejecting the HO when it was true. So for this problem, our type 1 error would be rejecting the null hypothesis when it was really actually true. And we'll revisit it at the end. The type 2 error would be failing to reject the null hypothesis when it's really actually false. So we'll look more into that. We are going to do, let's set before we even start an alpha of 0.05. So that is going to be our type 1 error rate, 0.05. In type 2, you don't have to actually calculate what the percentage is that you'd make an error. Let's set up some hypotheses. So what I was saying before is this is always our equals. What should we equal? What should the proportion of the population really honestly equal? And it's easy when you look at the problem. I think they should equal 30%. So what causes a red light is like this example, we're at 22%. Is this okay? Is it within reason, or is it just too far-fetched for it to be, able to happen? Now, 22% is a good example, but what if we were to get like 44%, something bigger? Any of those are kind of far away from my 30% here. So technically, if I get lower than 30%, then I'm thinking maybe I should audit them more. And maybe if they got a lot higher than 30% of starting digits of 1, then maybe I should audit them as well. So this is where this does not equal. We're going to test this and see what if they're far away from or not equal to 30% and they're off from it, below or above. Then I'm going to see if it's still something that's feasible that could actually happen, or is it something that is just too far gone for it to be able to occur. So to do our statistics test, you always want to make sure 3 conditions. I keep forgetting them, but let's try to remember. Random, normal, and independent. Random, does it say somewhere that you're picking random sample? Yes. Normal, for that proportion to be normal, it's got to be this formula. And Q10. So 22.22 times 300, and it's like 20%, that's going to be higher. Yeah, it's like around 66. And then obviously if that's higher than 0.78 or something like that, times 300 is going to be much higher. That works. Independent is this 10% rule. In this accounting, or in this company's financial records, they're looking through 300 expenses. Do you think that is 10% or less of what they normally have for expenses? If it's a company, I'm assuming they've got more than 300 expenses. And like I had said before, we're not going to, give you a problem and then say, oh, you did all that work for nothing. Odds are, if we give you a problem, you can calculate it. So let's take a look at our stats statistical test. I want to make sure that I am copying right from that formula sheet. So we've got the test statistic, and it equals statistic minus parameter over standard deviation of the statistic. So we're still on z-scores for this one. What occurred in the sample? What do we think should have occurred in the population? What occurs in the population? And then we've got to find our standard deviation of the sample. And we always use what should have occurred as well. I'm thinking 699. So when I calculated this, I'm getting 0.0265, something like that. If we do all this math, subtract, then divide by 0.0265, I'm getting around negative 2.81 is where I was getting around that. So our z-score is negative 2.81. We've got to look up our z-score to see what our probability is. Our probability, negative 2.81. I'm getting 0.0025. And keep that in mind, this part, the probability is 0.025 that it would be lower, and 0.025 that it would be higher. So you do have to count it twice in this problem, regardless what we're comparing it to. And we said we were going to compare it to alpha, this is our p-value, and we're comparing it to 0.05. Does this seem super far-fetched that it's impossible to do? When you look at this, P is low, reject the hope. So we're going to make sure that we state that in our sentence at the bottom. Since the p-value is lower than alpha, we reject the null hypothesis. We have, a lot of times we'll put this like, we have significant evidence that the proportion of expenses, I guess that we would keep restating that begin with the digit, first digit of 1. Is not 30%. Therefore, AJL and Associates This is kind of a red light for them. They should do a more thorough investigation. Now, think about the implications of making an error. A type 1 error is rejecting the HO when it's in fact true. This is the situation we're in right now. The type 1 error would be, we did reject the HO. We said that this could not have possibly happened by chance. Something is wrong here in these records, and maybe they were forged or something. So rejecting it when it's really true, let's say it's a legit thing with this company. Let's say that these expenses don't really match that for this company. So our error, our type 1 error is that we've done a investigation on a company that was actually not fraudulent at all. And the type 2 error would not really apply because we didn't fail to reject it. We actually rejected it because we felt that the null hypothesis was false for this problem.